Welcome to a special program about lawyers and legends. My name is Gilbert A. Smith Jr., and I'm here with my dad, Judge Gilbert A. Smith, to talk about lawyers and legends of Manatee County and to talk about some his time practicing law in the 1950s and 60s. Dad, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I wanted, if we could, Dad, for you to talk about what it was like to practice law in the 1950s in Florida first, with respect to coming out of law school in 1951?
1951, and there were very few lawyers in Florida, very few people in Florida, about 2 million. And we had about 100 judges in all Florida. And I went to work for the road department, and I tried cases around the state and with some of the best lawyers in the state. And it was very, very interesting for me, although a lot of traveling.
So you tried cases in most counties?
In most counties and most circuits in Florida, yes.
So what were the courthouses like?
Some of them were nice, and some of them were not so nice. I remember one in Wakulla County one time. I went into the clerk's office, and the chicken was running down the hall, coming out of the courthouse.
And that's in North Florida?
Yeah, it's in North Florida, not far from Tallahassee, Wakulla County.
So that when I talk about in my book some of the history of Manatee County Courthouse, in the early 1900s, they did have to put a fence around the courthouse because it was open range. And at that time, the story is that was to keep out any roaming cattle or even hogs that roamed. So
yeah, I suppose that was in East Manatee.
Right.
You're talking about. That was before my time, even.
Right. But you're saying that even some of the rural courthouses you were in.
Oh yeah. I remember the open range, of course, and be driving down the highway, and all of a sudden a herd of cattle would be in the road.
Crossing it.
Standing in it, eating. That's where most of the grass was on the sides of the roads. And they had no fences. And there was a lot of accidents, of course.
And so those rural courthouses, they were in rural areas where probably cattle were close to the courthouse.
Well, I never saw any cattle next to it, but some of the rural courthouses were very, very small. And once in a while, you get in a rural county and they have a real modern courthouse. You know, they had a lot of money or spent a lot of money, but like Shipley and...
Well, you've told me some stories over the years, and one of the stories you told me was trying a case in LaBelle. That was a condemnation case, wasn't it?
That was.
And do you remember the judge?
Yeah, it was Judge Gerald from Fort Myers.
Lynn Gerald, who I talk about in my book.
Yeah, Lynn Gerald was a very fine judge, but very strict. And we were trying this condemnation case in LaBelle, and back in those days, that was in the 50s, they didn't have any restaurants in LaBelle. They had a general store that sold sandwiches. But at 12 o'clock, he'd recess and he'd take all the jury and the lawyers on both sides, and the jail's behind the courthouse, and we'd walk over there and the sheriff would feed us all.
You'd sit out on picnic tables?
Yeah, well, they had a dining room in there, you know, I mean, where the prisoners ate.
So that's where you went and ate?
And yeah, they had a black cook. She was wonderful. At one time, the story was, whether it's true or not, I don't know, that the sheriff went to Judge Gerald. This girl was accused of murdering her husband, and he asked Judge Gerald, she's such a good cook, to sentence her to life in prison in the LaBelle County, what is that county? In the county jail down there. And Judge Gerald did.
And that's Hendry County.
Hendry County, that's
and
right.
At that time, that was in the 12th Judicial Circuit.
Right.
Which went all the way from Hillsborough County line down to what, Everglades City?
Right.
And Everglades City was the county seat?
County seat for that county.
So
yeah.
what was the courthouse like in Everglades City?
Actually, it was fairly good. It was built on stilts, of course. Everglades City was in Collier County, and of course Collier County is basically swamp, except Naples. Naples came along later. And the courthouse was built up high because they had a little water problem sometimes. And it didn't get in the courthouse. But it was a fairly modern courthouse. The Colliers owned most of Collier County, and they were big landowners, and they built the courthouse. And it was right nice. I don't know whatever happened to it after they moved it.
After they moved it.
To Naples.
You told me another story, and this happened to be in East Florida. You told me a story about trying a case in Palatka, and there was a judge up there, and at that time, when you were trying cases in the 50s, there wasn't any air conditioning, was there?
No.
And so the windows were open?
Right.
So tell me, remember that story?
Yeah, I remember that. That was Judge Revel, and Judge Revel was a very short judge, about 5 foot. And the windows were open in the courtroom, and a fellow was mowing the lawn with a gas mower, making a lot of noise. And so the judge sent the deputy sheriff down there to quiet him down. And he quieted him down for about 10 minutes, and he started it up again. And so the judge had him arrested and brought into court and reprimanded him in front of everybody. Interesting.
Yeah. Now, is that the judge also that you kept objecting to some evidence that the other side was trying to introduce?
That's right.
So what happened about that?
Well, it was a road department case, and I was assisting the county attorney. And they had a surveyor testified, and he was trying to testify to engineering. And I kept objecting that he wasn't qualified to testify to engineering drawings on my road department maps. And the judge kept overruling me, and the county attorney kept chugging me and said, "You're going to jail if you keep doing that." So I kept doing it, but I didn't ever get to jail.
Oh, okay. And did you win the case?
Who knows how you win? We did all right.
All right. And I talk about some of these judges in the book that you practiced before. And so let me just ask you about some of these judges. You already talked about Judge Gerald, so you tried some cases in front of Judge Hensley?
Yeah, Judge Hensley, and actually Judge Harrison before Judge Hensley.
Okay.
Judge Harrison was here. They had 2 judges in the 12th Circuit. And they had one here and one in Fort Myers. And Judge Harrison was in Bradenton, and Judge Gerald was in Fort Myers. And Judge Gerald, being the junior judge, he traveled all the counties, and Judge Harrison stayed here.
Because he was the senior?
Yeah, but they were both very good judges.
And you tried a lot of cases with both
Well, yes, a good many cases.
Right.
With both of them.
And how about Judge Hensley?
Well, Judge Hensley succeeded Judge Harrison when
Right.
he died. In the meantime, they had another judge named Odom.
Judge Archie Odom.
Or Archie Odom. And I tried a lot of cases in front of Archie, too.
And they were good judges?
All of them were very good judges.
Okay, and Judge Hensley later became not only your colleague as a judge, but also a very good friend.
Very close friend, yes.
And you
very good judge.
Did you try cases in front of Judge Silvertooth?
Yeah, Judge Silvertooth was at law school with me, and he was an assistant state attorney in the 12th Circuit. And he got appointed circuit judge, and I tried several. And I remember one time there was a lawyer out of Venice that addressed me as Smith, and one of my associates,
and I think I know who that
Lamar
was.
Matthews.
Lamar Matthews.
Yeah, jumped up and said, "Mr. Smith, to you." And we got into a big argument, and Judge Silvertooth slammed his mallet down and said he was going to put us all in jail if we didn't shut up. So we shut up.
And finished the case.
Yeah, oh yeah. And that was Casper on Beach in Venice. Very big case. And I think we won it.
Do you remember what it was like when you first moved to Bradenton and began practicing law?
Oh yeah.
And
that was 1960.
So do you remember how many lawyers were there?
I don't. There was probably 50 or 60.
Okay. And what was it like practicing law to where you were in such a smaller community than where you had been earlier?
Oh, it was nice. Sarasota had a lot. They had about double the amount of lawyers that Manatee had. But you know, we all got along good, really, and I didn't have any problems.
And in those days, there were a lot of things you don't have now. There weren't any cell phones.
No.
And so there weren't. In fact, let's talk about some of those things, the changes that have been in practicing law, such as copy machines. When you started practicing law, what type of machines?
Well, when I first used carbon paper, you didn't have a copying machine.
And
So you had to put carbon paper in your typewriter.
And so when you started practicing law, you had an assistant or a secretary that helped you with that, or did you do some of that?
Oh, no, we had secretaries.
At the road department?
Yeah, of course, I did some typing also. But,
and you know that many of the lawyers coming out of law school now don't even know what carbon paper is.
I know that.
And so at that
But if
time,
you went to get a public record at that time, they'd type it out, you know.
they typed the public record out.
Yeah, and certify it was true. It cost you a little bit more money than they do now.
Okay. Okay. And there weren't any computers.
No.
And so all the secretaries had typewriters.
Yes.
And so as a lawyer, when you were in private practice, you kept your time because of clients. How were you doing that? Writing it?
We wrote it down.
And then gave it to your secretary that way.
Right, and they recorded it weekly, yeah.
And at that time, this is before there were fax machines, so
Right.
all your communication was with mail,
Oh, yeah, that's all.
with lawyers.
Lawyer, sure. You didn't have any facts. I didn't know what that was.
Okay, and so it was more simple times back then.
Well, maybe, and it was good times. You know, it was a different time, of course.
What were lawyers' offices like back then?
They were nice. They had a secretary and typewriters.
Did they have big lobbies like they do now?
Yeah,
waiting
they had
rooms?
lobbies. And
Pretty big?
big. Some of them were huge.
Some of the larger firms?
Yeah, I remember going, after I got appointed to the court, when our court administrator talked to me about getting computers for the girls, judicial assistants. And anyhow, we planned it, and he purchased them. And one weekend, a long weekend, we took all the typewriters out and put computers. And one of our judicial assistants heard we were going to do it, and she hit her typewriter. Well, we couldn't take it. But we'd send them all to class on how to operate the computer. I never did learn.
So let me ask you about another person who you were a judge with, and that's Roy Dean. So
I was very good friend.
Good friend and good judge.
Yes, Roy was got appointed right before I did, and he was in Sarasota. And Roy was from Indiana? No.
Minnesota?
Minnesota. He went to University of Minnesota. And he practiced in Venice, but he was a very good judge and a very good friend. And I was sorry to see when he left the bench.
And he left the bench.
He left the bench to go back and practice law, yeah.
Okay. Okay. And the times were so different from the time you practiced law until you went on the bench, actually, that you saw a lot of changes during that time.
Oh, yeah.
When we, earlier today, we went to the courthouse and we visited the historic Manatee County Courthouse that they're actually renovating, the only courtroom that was in existence when you practiced.
Yeah, that was well, it was the only courtrooms in the north end of the building. Went all the way across the building, and they had a balcony for the blacks in the court. And I remember trying the case there with Judge Harrison, and there was a candidate named from Kentucky running for president, And he had his loudspeaker out on the corner of, I guess it's Manti Avenue and 12th Street, blasting away, and all the windows were open. We had no air conditioning. And the speech was coming right through into the courtroom. And we tried to proceed and couldn't hear, and Judge Harrison finally recessed until that candidate left.
The fact that you just brought up about no air conditioning resulted in the courtroom being exposed to all this noise outside.
Yes, and
that a lot of people wouldn't even think about nowadays.
Right, they had made Manatee Avenue one way going west. And the trucks would come through there, the big old trucks, and they'd break down, and you could read it like they were just about in the courtroom. You couldn't hear a word.
And you mentioned that historically, because of how hot it got in Florida, that a lot of the judges started court earlier.
Yeah, when we were trying cases in July and September, it usually, the judges in a big jury trial start maybe 8 o'clock in the morning and run straight through to 1 to 1:30, 2 o'clock, and then recess for the day with no lunch. Because the heat would build up down, and it was so hot it's unbearable.
Okay, it was just too hot.
And some judges allowed lawyers to take their coats off. Back in those days, you know, lawyers were very formal.
Right.
And they wore suits and ties, and some of the judges would let you take your coat off in a hot summer while you were trying the case even.
Well, you know, when I was researching for my book, I noticed going through a lot of not only the photographs, but also articles, that what you just said was so true, that lawyers back then all wore suits every day and ties, as if they were going to court every day.
That's right.
Even if lawyers weren't going to court, they dressed up.
There was no casual Fridays.
There was no casual Fridays, so they were always dressed
That's right.
appropriately.
I wore a suit to the office every day.
Right.
Suit and tie.
Every day. So
every day.
And most lawyers did.
Oh yeah, all lawyers did.
And most lawyers had their hair cut short.
That's
very
right.
conservative, and
no long hairs.
No long hairs. And so it was that way for a long time, wasn't it? Growing up, do you remember the lawyers that you knew?
Yeah, it was that way up into almost the 70s. I guess the late 60s they started relaxing a little bit.
When you were growing up in Arcadia, and you knew lawyers in town, were they dressed up?
Oh yeah, always.
Always dressed up.
Always dressed.
And so what was it?
Tie.
What was it like growing up in Arcadia?
It was a wonderful town to grow up in. It was very small. We had about 5,000 people. And of course we had one school and one high school for the whole county. It was very good. You know, it was a nice little town. I had never left Arcadia.
From the time you were born?
Well, I had a grandfather and a grandmother that lived in Dade City, and we used to go up there in the summer sometimes for a week. But I'd never been on a railroad until I went into service in 1942. I'd never ridden on a train. And that was a good experience.
So the train came to Arcadia?
Oh, they had 2 trains from going through Arcadia daily, but I never got to ride one.
Until when? You left?
Well, when I left, I went to, I caught the train out of Tampa to Jacksonville, and then on to Norfolk, Virginia.
So do you remember when you were young in Arcadia, who the judge was?
Judge Harrison.
Judge Harrison? So
he was a circuit judge. He'd come over there every 2 or 3 weeks.
So it's amazing to think.
We had a county judge named Hayes.
Okay. But it's amazing to think Judge Harrison, when you were a young man, was the judge over there, and then when you began practicing, he was still on the bench.
Judge Harrison, I guess, went on the bench in the 30s, and he died in 58, 57, 58. So he was a judge for a long time. Okay.
And then who were some of the lawyers over there? Do you remember?
Yeah, the Treadwells were there. They had a couple of Treadwells. And Laura Roslin, which was Bobby Roslin's father, was a lawyer over there. A fellow named Purvis was a very good lawyer, was over there. And there were a couple of three others, and 5 or 6 lawyers.
So let me ask you about a few lawyers in Manatee County and Sarasota. One would be George Harrison. You knew George?
George was in law school with me. Yeah. He was Judge Harrison's son. And his brother in Sarasota, Bill Harrison.
And so you, after law school, you kept up with each other?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I was with the road department, I'd always stop by and see him. And after about 10 years, I came down and was an associate with his firm, Ed Johnson.
For a while before you
went with Dye firm, yeah.
Okay, all right.
He's a good lawyer.
And
still practicing, I guess.
Yeah, and another lawyer is John Manson. You knew John?
Yeah, John's younger than I am, but yeah, he and Tom Stewart practiced for a long time in Manatee, and very, very good lawyers.
So let's go back to talking about Judge Harrison, if we could, for a few minutes. Again, we were back in the courtroom today, and the courtroom was, it's been totally stripped so that it's down to its bare walls. There was a room behind the bench. What was that?
Well, the bench was in the courtroom, and behind that there was about a room about probably 10 by 12, and it was right behind the bench. And that when the judge recessed, that's where he'd go. He'd go back there and sit down because his office was down on the next floor.
Okay.
And, he didn't go back to his office. And and that's where he had conference with the lawyers. He'd go back there with you.
Would he ever call the lawyers back there?
Oh, yeah.
And was that to
have little conferences and maybe chew out time and stuff like that.
Okay. And then where did the jurors go?
Well, they had a jury room right off of there. They'd go. It wasn't like the day they used to, you know, sometimes he'd let the jury just walk around, you know.
Walk around?
Yeah, you know, and tell them not to talk about the case.
You mean when you have a recess,
yeah.
You let them, what, take a stretch break
oh, yeah,
and walk around?
Lunch, you know, and let them go to lunch and just go home.
Go home for a while?
Go home for lunch and come back.
Okay. Okay. And you mentioned about the balcony they had in the back of the courtroom for the blacks, the African Americans. Yeah. Did they have their own entrance?
Yes, they did. It was on the outside. I mean, it's on the third floor, but it was entrance outside the courtroom to the balcony.
So were they not allowed to come down inside the courtroom?
No. As far as I know, they were not allowed. Yeah.
At the time that you were practicing law, and that was the custom.
Oh, yeah.
Did you think about at that time being fair or not fair? Or?
Well, of course, it's inherently not fair.
Right.
And I knew that, and I guess most people knew that.
But that was
the way it was.
The custom.
That's the way it was.
And it was that way about a lot of things, wasn't
it? Yes, right.
And at the time in the courthouse, at that time, were all elected officials in the courthouse?
Every elected official had an office in the courthouse.
So isn't it amazing now where
And most of them had plenty of room, I might add.
All of them had. And so you spent some time in the Desoto County Courthouse.
Yes.
And they've got such a magnificent courtroom.
Well, it's the same courthouse that was built, I think it was 1960. And as I recall, there was a contractor built that, and it seems like to me the figure was like $25,000 to build that. This same courthouse they got now is huge, beautiful. And the county commission in the 70s redid that courthouse, some federal money they got, and some other money, and restored it to its original. And it's almost original now. And I might add that most of the county commissioners got beat after that for spending the money. But that's another story.
Well, it is
beautiful courthouse.
It's a beautiful courtroom.
Oh, it's a beautiful courthouse.
over there. Now, one of the significant things you did when you were chief judge is you were faced with issues of security, which now, of course, is commonplace and is so strict. But talk about that in the 80s, what you were faced with.
Well, let's talk about a little before that. There was no security in the courthouse, none at all. And the judges, if they had a bailiff, he was a deputy sheriff. And what happened in the 70s, or the early 80s actually, there was a judge up in Gulf County, which is West Florida, and a friend of mine named Bailey. He was doing a domestic case, and the husband pulled out a gun and killed his wife and the judge. And so that made us, chief judges, start thinking about security, and the state administration. And so we had some FBI agents come down and give seminars. And then that's when we installed the security in the courthouse in Manatee and Sarasota and Desoto. And that was the first in this area now. And they did good. The sheriff did it, and then he contracted it out later.
And it actually, once you started, it was sort of surprising to see what type of things people were bringing in.
Oh yeah, you bring guns, knives. They used to have barrels full of knives that taken away from people. But they bring guns, and they brought everything. And it's a wonder somebody wasn't hurt before.
Right, right. Well, I want to ask you about another attorney that you practiced with and knew for years, and that's Dewey Dye Jr. Now, we can talk about both Dewey Dye Sr. and Jr., but let's talk about Dewey Dye Jr. first. You knew him for a while?
Oh, yeah, I knew Dewey. Dewey was in law school with me. He graduated a little before I did. But he's a very fine lawyer. And his father was a very fine lawyer. And I knew him, I kept up with him when I was a road department. And then when I came down and went with George Harrison for a few months, and then anyhow, Dewey asked me to come with them, and I went over to that firm.
And when you went with them, who was there?
Well, Bob Scott was there, and I was there, and Dewey Dye, and Dewey Dye Sr. and Jr. were there. And George, what was he?
Hitchcock.
George Hitchcock, who had been a former prosecutor and a county judge in Manatee County, a very nice guy. He was there. He did mostly probate at that time.
And Dewey Dye was
Dewey Dye represented the county. He was county attorney. He's also he was attorney for the West Coast Inland Navigation District. And when I went with him, I started doing that work. And we are also attorneys for the hospital.
Okay. Yeah. And Dewey Dye Sr., you got to know him. He had quite a remarkable career.
He really did. He was one of the remarkable men. He started practicing here about 1919 or something. And yeah, he could tell a million stories. Very delightful person.
And he'd been a senator?
Yeah.
And quite involved in the community.
Yeah, he was actually Senate Pro Tem, I think, one year.
Okay.
And he's very involved in the legislation in Florida. Yeah.
Okay. And so let's talk about a couple of other people that you were on the bench with. Let's talk about Tom Gallen. You knew Tom?
Yeah, I knew Tom, but Tom was a lot younger than I. But Tom came here about the time I did, to tell you the truth, and started practicing law. And then was elected to the legislature and served several terms before he was elected senator.
And so he was actually in the legislature and the Senate when you were on the bench.
Well, he may have been in the Senate, but he was practicing law, of course, and then he later got appointed to the bench, but that was about the time, that was in the 80s.
Okay. when you were finishing up.
Yeah, he was a very good judge. Yeah, sure.
Okay, and so then let's talk about John Justice. We hadn't talked about him yet. Tell me about him as a judge.
Well, as I told you earlier, the 12th Circuit had 2 judges for a long time, and then they got through, the legislature said if you had a fraction of 50,000 people in the county, you get an additional judge. So Judge Justice, you got 2, Judge Justice in Sarasota and Judge Odom in Fort Myers. So we had 4 judges in the circuit. And Judge Justice was a resident judge in Sarasota. That's where he was from. He was a city attorney down there before. Very good judge. He took over Arcadia when Judge Harrison died. So he used to go over there monthly and did Sarasota. A likable guy. And I guess I don't know, he's still alive?
No, he passed away, but
he was 90-something years old.
Yeah, and you recall when we had the Legends of the Bench program.
Oh yeah.
Both Judge Justice and Judge Willis were there.
That's right.
At that time, so we had quite a reunion.
Yeah, when I went on the bench, Judge Justice was chief judge. Of course, there wasn't but 5 judges then. There was Judge Hensley and here, and Judge Silvertooth and Judge Justice in Sarasota, Roy Dean, and myself.
Okay.
That was all the circuit judges.
And you covered the entire circuit?
Yeah, but we had 2 court of records. We had one here in Bradenton and one in Sarasota.
Okay.
Which he had judges on, the court of record judges. Harry Parham was here and Judge Silverman was in Sarasota. And in 1973, Court Amendment, Constitution Amendment, abolished those courts and gave us some more circuit judges. And Judge Parham got elected circuit judge. Judge Shaw came up at that time.
Okay.
And Judge Gabi.
Evelyn Gabi.
Yeah, she was our first female judge in the circuit.
Okay.
Had a lot since.
Yeah. and a lot of people don't really understand what happened in the 1960s with respect to the Florida looking at the Constitution that they hadn't amended since the 1800s, basically.
1885.
And Article 5 was one where it made significant changes to the judiciary.
It really was significant. We had, before that time, we had justices of peace and courts all over Florida and constables all over Florida arresting people. And Article 5, it abolished, we had city courts in all the cities.
Municipal court judges.
Municipal courts.
Yeah.
And Article 5 abolished all those courts. And we have 2 trial courts, the county court and the circuit court. And a significant difference in what most states do. Most states are like we were prior to Article 5.
Still are.
Yeah, still are. You got all kinds of judges running around.
Well, I think our time's run out, and I appreciate you talking to me about some of the history of practicing law and being on the bench in Florida and this last half of this century. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed being here, and you didn't tell him it was my 90th birthday.
No, I didn't. And so it is my dad's 90th birthday, and he's going to have many more birthdays to come. So
I don't know about that.
Hope we can come back and visit with him some more about his experiences in practicing law and serving on the bench in Florida. Thank you very much.